This video is a practical guide for you portrait photographers that are trying to answer the question of, should I get a 7200 or an 85 as my main portrait lens? My name is Pi, and I'm one of the founders of Lynn and Jersa Photography and SLRLounge.com. We're teaming up with Adorama to bring you a new series of photography tutorials called Master Your Craft right here on Adorama TV. So let's dive in. What's up, friends? My name is Pi. Welcome to Adorama TV. Okay, let's get right into this. I wanted to make this practical guide to these two lenses because this was a big question for me. Should I get a 7200? Can I achieve the look that I would in an 85? Should I get one, or do I need both of these lenses? And granted, I'm holding up Canon lenses, but I believe that this really applies across the board to the 85 versus 7200 comparison with any brand these days. If you asked me this question, by the way, 5 years ago, I would have said the 85, that you couldn't achieve the same look with a 7200. These days, I'm going to tell you this now because I hate videos that make you wait till the end. I lean more toward the 7200, and I believe that this is going to be the right choice for the majority of you, but I still want to walk you through the examples and show you practically the different considerations between these because there are merits to both these lenses, and I want you to make the right decision for you. Let's start with our first argument, which is aesthetics. What we're really talking about when we say, should we get the 7200, is can the 7200 at f2.8 achieve the same look that we would get from an 85 prime at f2 or f1.4 or 1.2? So I've compared 18 or so different images to kind of look at. And this is where I want to start our conversation. So I'm going to go full screen. You're looking at raw files that have nothing applied to them because I want you to know there's no funny business going on. I want you to guess and see if you can figure out which of these lenses was used to shoot the portrait. Okay, and we'll scan them and then I'll go back through and review them. The thing is, for me, as you look at these images, if I were to, have asked this question, or if someone asked me 5 years ago, I would have said the 85. The 85s, like the Canon 85 1.2 and all the previous lenses, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I felt like you couldn't get to the same look with a 7200. It was just impossible. And by the way, I've mixed in some medium format stuff too at 80 millimeters, just so you can see. But since mirrorless, the next generation of lenses have just been blowing me away. I've been looking at zoom lenses that perform like primes. And this is what has really shifted in my standpoint in this argument. Okay, now in scanning through these, did you have guesses in your head of which is which? And a side note, notice that I'm not showing you images side by side. And there's an argument to be had where you could say, well, Pi, if we wanted to compare these two lenses, wouldn't you just, shoot the exact same subject in a field and showcase them side by side? Well, yeah, if you wanted a nuanced comparison between them, then sure. But what I want is a practical comparison. See, anybody, if you show an 85 1.2 image next to a 7200 2.8 image, anybody's going to be able to distinguish them. But my question is, practically, when you see these images, do you know? Because that's the way that our clients, that's the way that our audience, that's the way other people are viewing them. And if you and I have a difficult time when we look at just these images, then imagine what they're going to think when they look. They're going to have no clue. So now bringing up the information, I want you to take a look at this. And I'm going to talk about some other things too on how you can get your 7200 to look more like an 85 prime. But looking at this, so this was a 7200. 7200, same thing. Same thing. This one surprised me, like the way that the rails kind of went out of focus and that soft compression of it looked absolutely incredible. These look like 85 millimeter shots to me. This is an 85. This is an 85 at 1.2, mind you. So this is the 2.0 version. This was on the, I think it's like $2,500 to $3,000. This is on the expensive version with the defocus smoothing. And I still struggled to see like what is the difference between these. Again, this has the defocus smoothing as well. This is the 85. 85. This is on the medium format. This is a GFX 100S on an 80 millimeter at 1.7. Again, is there that substantial of a difference between the background aesthetics? Not really. Okay, this is all on that GFX 100, GFX, Okay, this one was on the 7200. And this one, actually, when I photographed it, by the way, I always work in my children into these whenever possible. This is my baby girl. Got to get her into these. But when I shot this image, that's when I knew that we're looking at a completely new level of lens manufacturing, because I saw this and this looked just like a prime to me. So does this. This is on the 7200. 7200. So that first argument we can already squash, right? Yes, we can achieve a similar look with the 7200 as we can with an 85, at least with this next generation of lens. And let me show you kind of a couple. I'd selected a few of these that did a good job of exaggerating the background. And even if I were to process these, right? Watch this. I'll do a quick process on this one. I'm going to apply Visual Flow Modern. And we'll go back to the last image. Let me bring up the film strip. Go back to this one, apply the same thing, brighten this up a little bit. And this one actually looks really good right here. I might just add a little bit, and maybe we'll flip this over to hard light and then pull it down a bit in brightness and lift the shadows. I'm struggling to see like the actual brightness of this. Okay, and let's do the same thing here. The reason why I'm adding a little bit of editing to this is because I feel like when it's bright and kind of the way that it's intended to be, that it's a little bit easier to start seeing what the final image and kind of how it's going to look. What does the bokeh kind of turn into at that point? So I'm going to process these right in front of you. So again, you don't think that there's any funny business. I'm not adding bokeh. I'm not doing anything kind of crazy that I shouldn't be. And then we're going to compare again. And granted, they're different scenes, different light qualities, but the blur and the background aesthetic is beautiful on both shots. I wouldn't be able to distinguish them. If you were to look at these and go, which of these was an 85, I bet you'd say this one. It looks more like an 85, whereas this is the actual 85 shot. But this is again going down to how the leaves are being backlit and all that kind of stuff. Here it's more backlit, so it is more exaggerated. Whereas over here, it's a little more top down, so we don't see the same exaggeration. And even these two, these are completely smushed out of focus, right? They both have the ability to smush your backgrounds completely out of focus. I don't know that there's a substantial difference between any of these. I'm hoping at this point we've kind of squashed the aesthetic piece of this question. Because between the two focal lengths, aesthetically, there's not much of a difference between them. And by the way, let's talk about some of the other nuanced differences. And the first thing I'm gonna bring up is kind of understanding what it is that you're shooting and the distances you're shooting at. So the next thing that I want to bring up is whether you're doing events and portraits, or if you're just shooting portrait work. Okay, so this is the next big thing is what are you primarily shooting? If you're talking you do events and portrait work, I'm going to lean you towards this side every single time. And we're assuming, by the way, that you have a limited budget and you don't want to just go drop $6,000 to buy both these lenses and carry them around with you. Because I personally, even budget considerations aside, I just don't want to carry more than I need to, right? If you're on the event and portrait side, I would 1000% go toward the 7200. And the reason is, your 7200 has versatility in terms of not only its focal length. So when it comes to moments like this, okay, we can step back behind, and because it's bothering me, I'm going to go ahead and just edit this image. Let's go and apply the tungsten. We can step back and actually shoot through different objects and get a really beautiful look. We get the background blur. I'm shooting through candles to kind of create a little bit of a foreground. And on top of that, it's quick to focus. One thing that you have to understand with an 85 is even with the next generation, this latest set of 85s, in comparing their focus speed, the 7200 is always going to win. This is always going to be a bit slower. And when you're talking like the 1.2 versions, yeah, you're still going to have those moments where your focus is hunting. Not a big deal if you primarily just shoot portrait work, right? But if you're doing events, if you're doing sports, if you're doing anything with moving subjects, this is going to matter. Your focal length and everything like that is going to matter. So if you're on the event side, I'm going to put you here every single time. Aesthetically, it can do exactly what you need. Plus, it's going to be more versatile in focal length, quicker to focus, all of that. If you are on the portrait side, and maybe you do quite a bit of low light work, like you do a lot of evening portraits and that kind of stuff, I would start leaning you more toward the 85 prime. You don't do that many events. You're not doing sports, and so you don't need the quick focus speed, but you do want the kind of extra exaggerated depth. It will have a little bit more, and you want the extra low light capability. At f2, you get an extra stop of light compared to an f2.8 lens. And then when you go down to 1.2, that's another stop and a half. So you're getting 2.5 stops roughly of extra light on this side. And if you're doing evening portraits, that matters. But there's one other key thing here that I wanted to bring up, and that is your typical distance to subject. See, the 85 is going to allow you to work at a closer distance to the subject that you're photographing while achieving the aesthetic, that shallow depth of field. The 7200 is going to require that you step back and that you zoom in. And let me show you exactly what I mean. So when you're looking at these images, right? If we were to go back to this shoot, for example, I'm on the GFX 100 with an 80 millimeter, and I'm not that far from her. My working distance might be 7-8 feet from her. It's not a huge working distance. And so I can get a very shallow depth of field with that distance. But in other cases, like let's say that I'm working with the 7200, let's say one of these images, right? Notice that I'm going to be 86 millimeters. Let's see if I get tighter. This one's at 135, which means that I have to be that much further away. So you're going to get a better blur. You're going to get that more prime-like aesthetic on a zoom lens when you're zoomed beyond 100, 120. If you can go to 150 or even to 200 millimeters, that's when you're going to get the most exaggeration. But sometimes, you know, if you're in New York, if you're in places that are a lot of confined spaces, you don't have the distance to be able to back up and to zoom in all the time. And that means that if you need that prime aesthetic, you don't have the distance and you mainly shoot portraits, you're going to go with this guy. In fact, when you look over here at this image, this was shot at 200 millimeters. And that's the reason why we get so much of that depth. This is at 150, right? This one is same, 158. Again, 200 millimeters. We get the best bokeh aesthetic on the 7200 when zoomed fully in, or at least 150 to 200. And that's it. Now to summarize, for most of you, I would put you toward the 7200. It gives you the versatility to do events, to do portrait work, to achieve the same aesthetics. Granted, you need to back up a bit more. You need to zoom in a little bit more, but it also gives you more compression and distortion effects to kind of create interesting images. It's just more versatile overall. But let's say you primarily shoot portraits. You often do low light work. You need the extra stop to 2.5 stops of range on that side. You want to be able to work in tighter distances. Then by all means, the 85 is going to be the right call. But it's funny because over the past 5 years, even when I've had these two lenses in my bag, I'm always going to default to carrying one of them. And the one that wins out for me usually is the 7200 these days. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, I'd love for you to give the video a thumbs up. That tells Adorama and the team that I'm doing a good job. And leave me a comment below. Let me know what you think. And also if you have ideas for future videos. I do read all of your comments and I do try to reply when I get time as well. That being said, well, you know what to do on the channel. We have new videos going up every day. So if you want to be notified, we'd love for you to subscribe to Adorama TV. And you guys can find me at PyJirsa on Instagram. That's it. Peace.